49% of organizations are reporting an increase in driving investment in edge computing. My name is Paul Nashawaty. I'm the practice lead for the app dev practice at theCUBE Research. I'm joined by Derek from Synadia today. Welcome, Derek. Would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Hey, thanks, Paul. I appreciate it. Yep, my name's Derek Collison. Most people know me from the creator of Nets and Cloud Foundry, and I'm the CEO of Synadia.
Derek, thank you for joining us. This is awesome because it's really a hot topic. I know that there's a lot going on. I just saw the audience at KubeCon, and the booth was really exciting, and there was a lot of traffic and a lot of things going on. And mainly that's largely due to organizations are increasingly looking for scalable messaging platforms like Nets, right? And they're also looking to simplify connectivity. They want to enable these secure services and deploy across cloud regions and edge endpoints. I often hear these organizations are leveraging multi-cloud and edge computing. And in fact, in our research, we find that 94% of organizations are using 2 or more clouds and 65% are using 4 or more clouds. In addition to that, 20% of respondents in our recent survey indicated that they're looking at application portability as critical. AI is playing a large part in this role, as you can imagine. So Derek, with regards to edge and where the data and AI inferencing is happening, now that agents are coming into the landscape with managed cloud providers, is it more of a challenge for to tie it all together with the cloud technology and the glue to make it all stick?
Well, I mean, you raise a good question, and at least from our perspective, we really do believe that the step change that folks went through going from a server room or a data center to cloud, right? And cloud kind of rewrote a lot of the rules about how applications are deployed and managed. What I believe and Synadia believes is about to happen is that the step change going from cloud to edge will be even bigger. And so most folks, listening probably remember, cloud native, manifests and the 12 rules from, I think, Adam from Heroku back in the day. We really believe there is going to be as big a step change moving to edge as it was from data centers to cloud, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we look at that step change, they're moving from data centers to edge. I think it's, I was saying a while ago, I've been, as an analyst for some time, I was thinking, that we used to have all these words in front of cloud, right? We would have hybrid cloud and distributed cloud and on-prem and, public cloud, private cloud. And, I made this kind of prediction and I think it's going to hold true. And it is kind of holding true. I believe that all the words in front of cloud is just kind of going to go away. Right. And like cloud is just going to be what it is. Right. So it's really just going to be how organizations are working. In fact, when we look at the workloads that are happening, it's incredibly important that data is processed where that workload is occurring. So if there's data processing at the edge or in edge native solutions, how does that impact what Synadia is doing?
Yeah, I think, at least from our perspective, cloud's not going away, but I really do believe cloud's the new mainframe. People just don't want to admit it yet, meaning it's not going anywhere. But even today, when people think they're interacting with cloud, they're actually not. They're interacting with either CDNs or things like that. But I think some of the challenges when you move to the edge that people are struggling with is that everything that you can take for granted within the cloud, the batteries included, so to speak. Depending on the edge location, those things don't exist, right? And for better or worse, we've kind of gotten ourselves into a situation where the majority of distributed systems within the technology landscape are built around certain patterns that are starting to show that they're limiting once you move to the edge. So things like location dependence. I have to know where you are to talk to you, right? So you and I probably have a little bit of gray hair going on. So we remember when phones were connected to a wall, right? And I had to know, is he at home? Is he at the office? How do I get hold of him? And of course, now in our modern world, people would kind of laugh at that. It's like, no, I just know I want to talk to you, and it finds you wherever you are. But that's not the way the majority of systems work, right? It's like I need to know where you are, and so you can imagine a world where all of a sudden there's lots of you running around, right? And I want to know that I'm talking to you. I want to know that I'm secure and I can trust you. But I don't know if you're running in a factory and, a cloud provider, or, what region you're in and anything like that. And so I believe, two things are coming to fruition. I think edge-based systems are, and cloud did this a little bit from server rooms, where you don't know where things necessarily are running. Yes, you know that you're in AWS, US East 2 or whatever, but you don't necessarily know which machine you're on, right? That was kind of a big step change for those of us who worked in server rooms. We could walk in a server room and go, our stuff's running on that, that to you right there. I think Edge is also introducing a level of dynamic nature in systems that also makes folks a little bit uncomfortable, meaning, you know, there's 10 of you, now there's 100 of you, and these are microservices or data. And I really believe that even though there's so much going on in the technology landscape right now, and there's things that, I've just never even seen in my career about how fast we're going, you know, I think a goal of technology is vertical scaling and making things faster has largely people kind of know how to do that, right? What the big thing now is how do I get you closer to me? In other words, the main goal is to decrease latency and access time to data and services. I mean, I know that sounds very simplistic, but I believe that plus the dynamic nature of what Edge is starting to provide provides some opportunities for people to look at Edge differently. And when we talk about AI, and especially agentic AI, which it's a lot of buzzword bingo, but there's a lot of meat to it, and I don't think it's going away, right? So it's in one form or the other, it's going to keep moving forward. I think all of those challenges that we just discussed are amplified when you talk about where's the model, where's the LLM, where's the smaller models, where are all the agents I'm trying to talk to actually achieve work. And so you start to realize that as things become very dynamic, things are coming and going all over the place, data is coming and going all over the place. Um, that AI inference at the edge will accelerate some of these opportunities, challenges that become opportunities, from how people typically design and build cloud-based architectures.
So let's talk a little bit about that because I do want to touch on something that you mentioned. If you look at like the evolution of how this is occurring, I was watching a movie that was based in the '90s recently, and there was there's somebody on their cell phone, and they took their cell phone and they put it in their trunk, and they drove away. And it's like those days are long since gone. People don't leave them off. They're glued to their hand or they're always in front of you, which goes to the point of edge, right? We see that 76% of the world's top 100 banks have implemented or actively implementing edge computing. But more importantly, what we're seeing in the next 2 years, we're seeing the growth of worldwide production applications going from 500 to 1,000 production applications at the edge location alone, which means that the connectivity and the interoperability between these applications and systems will all have to kind of come together. And what we're also finding out is, as you mentioned, the introducing AI into the models and having access to your heritage systems of record and with new systems of engagement. That means that these new systems of engagement that are built at the edge will have to have access to those heritage systems. And the AI models of accessing these areas is becoming increasingly important to happen at the location where it's occurring. Right. So you mentioned agentic AI, right? Let's talk about agentic AI architectures, right? Derek, when we're thinking about security in mind and agentic AI, it really is looking at, accelerating the decrease in perimeter-based kind of security models. This was often made popular by cloud. What are your thoughts around how this is going to change over time because of the adoption at the edge and what's going on at the edge with agentic AI?
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, there's a little bit to unpack right there, right? So from a security stance, you know, perimeter security models is you can only do certain things when you're inside the house and you need a key to the house type stuff. I think where the world is going with edge driving it is more like your cell phone. If you have a SIM card and you've paid your bill, you are a production user. It doesn't matter if you're at your house, at work, on a plane in Europe, in North America, and in Japan, it doesn't matter. And so I do believe you're going to see a step change with perimeter security models, which are kind of the go-to, especially within cloud and enterprise systems, to something like, do you have the credentials, the SIM card in the application that can prove who's running that application? And more importantly, you have the trust and in the ability to be able to detect when something is not right and to revoke those, right? So revocation is part of the internet today, but it's very slow and it's kind of broken. And most people just kind of reinvent the wheel themselves to figure that type of problem out. When you talk about agentic AI, for those listening, I try to make things real simple so I can understand them in my head. Our brain operates in a vacuum where there's no sound, no light, no nothing, right? And that's kind of like the big LLMs today in my mind. And what agents do is they are the nervous system. They allow you to do things. And what MCP has done, which is kind of interesting and taking on the power of LLMs, is you just kind of put in instructions and descriptions of what the MCP server does, what the tools do, and the LLM can derive the context of which tool to call. But to your point, what happens is that where is the LLM running? Where are different models that it might be using, like a vision system on a connected car or something inside of a factory or on a cell tower, versus where are all the agents running, right? That the model is trying to actually affect physical reality, right? It's the physical embodiment of change that the AI model wants to make. And these things can be all over the place. And more importantly, as AI is getting better and better at coding, you could imagine a world where AI will start coding its own agents and running them and spinning them up and moving them around. And so when you think of systems that used to be built, 20 years ago, where you designed it, you built it, you secured it, and then no one touched it, meaning you didn't change it, right? And I think, listeners who've been around for a while might remember when you used to ask for access to the database, and the answer was always no, no, you can't do that. I think the modern world of these agentic AI systems are very fluid, very dynamic, but to your point also, they have to be trustworthy. So we have to be able
Yeah.
to trust the security within them. And I think that's going to take a little bit of different thinking over the MTLS, everything's behind a firewall and perimeter security model.
Yeah, I mean, this makes a lot of sense, but I think that the audience would, I think, was kind of looking at this thinking, well, a lot of what they're currently running today is built on their heritage environment, right? What we find in our research is, 80+% of applications are still in those siloed heritage environments. And those heritage environments need to modernize, right? But one of the things that, I think the real challenge you mentioned about agent-based systems is really at scale, right?
Yeah.
And when you mentioned the discovery, location, security, and scale as context, but also, being at the edge has a different solution than being cloud native. Would you
Oh
agree
yeah.
to that?
Oh yeah. No, again, earlier in the talk, I do believe that the step change in how we build and deploy systems, not necessarily how we architect them, is radically going to be different at the edge, more so than the step change from data center to cloud.
Yeah, yeah. But that brings up the point of how the technology and the tech stack is being used. So, like when you look at these MCP servers and how they're being used, are they being used for like personal use, single tenancy, multi-tenant? Like what is happening? You touched on this a little bit, but I want to double click on it because I think it makes a lot of sense to bring it up.
No, I think it's a really important issue, and I don't think anyone has the long-term answer. So, from my understanding, MCP servers, and I played with them and stuff like that, they inherit the security model by being on the computer that you already trust, right? So, in other words, it's your Claude desktop or ChatGPT. It's your computer. You're running the servers and connecting them into, let's say, Claude or not ChatGPT yet, but close, or Gemini. um, and so there's no necessarily formality around auth or auth. And that's fine to start, right? To get something kickstarted, I think the notion of something like MCP is extremely powerful, right? Especially the discovery phase of, the LLM discovering what's possible. Where we've started to think really hard about some of the challenges for the ecosystem and our customers, so to speak, is, well, what happens if that's not the case? What happens if there is an API and there's an MCP server that might be multi-tenant? Does the MCP server have auth-n capabilities? So for example, today, when I have an MCP server running on my computer, I can plug in all my credentials to allow it to do whatever it wants. And again, it's this notion of it's my computer. the computer itself is secured, and so therefore my information secured. But you could imagine a world where I'm talking to a public MCP server that's talking to other servers, and I don't want it or the LLM to be responsible for authenticating my authent, meaning who I am, auth being what I can do, but that it can use that information, right? And so we believe deeply that there's going to be a world that's going to push these agentic systems into really formalizing and understanding authent and auth, where neither the MCP server or the LLM actually knows your credentials that prove it's you. It's kind of like OAuth, you know what I mean? The what a lot of people use, where you're logging into a Bob and Vinny's pizza shop, but you're using Google to
Right.
authenticate who you are, right? Or
Right.
GitHub or Apple or whatever. I think that the next big wave, especially for enterprise systems, will be around that. Now, of course, Google has the ADA, um, but what's interesting about the ADA is, it's agents talking to each other to figure stuff out. And
Sure.
I'm putting most of my bets into the LLM under being able to keep accelerating and, moving at breakneck speed, such that there won't be anything better to understand context of how to glue together different tools and talk between different agents than the LLM itself. Not to say that 8A won't actually take off, but 8A will also have the same problem, which is I'm an MCP server trying to talk to another MCP server on behalf of Derek. You know what I mean? I can prove that it's Derek. I don't have his credentials, but I can say, yes, I know it's him and I know he's allowed to do X, Y, and Z. And so we've been looking at that problem pretty hard from a standpoint of, hey, everyone's doing an MCP server for whatever product or service they may or may not have these days, and we could have easily done that ourselves. But I thought it was more important for us to kind of think, where's the puck going, right? Where's the puck going to
Yeah.
be in a year? And I don't think it's everyone is just plugging these into their own Claude desktop on their own computers.
No, Derek, I mean, you're hitting on a lot of incredibly important points, and there's a lot of tech in the market, and there's a lot of emerging companies that are trying to kind of do different things to address these challenges and problems. And I think that's also with our audience here. They're looking at it from the perspective of various stages of their maturity. Like, they could be at the early stages, they can be very mature, and they can basically use what we're talking about here and understand how to implement in their environments. But Derek, I want to bring it back to you on a final thoughts. I know we're kind of coming to the end of our session here, but when we look at the final thoughts here, we talked about a lot. There's definitely a lot of intricacies that people want to know about here. Where would you advise somebody to go to learn more about this in their journey?
Well, in terms of edge, right? I mean, there's lots of information out there. Synadia has a bunch of papers on things that we feel are important, right? Not necessarily just to our customers, but just in general. But I think the point that you highlighted on this talk, and I agree with, is that as much as edge has changed, how things are done in cloud, and they're done very differently at the edge, and then will continue so. I think that path is accelerating now because of things like agentic AI. And again, I know that's kind of a buzzword, but I do believe it's here to stay, and I believe we are on the path. We're not going to go into another AI winter, which I think in my career, I went through two long ones, one coming out of university. And so Synadia.com for stuff of how we're trying to think about these problems and how we're trying to address these. But yeah, and the information is going so fast. I daily try to watch a bunch of YouTube videos on what happened yesterday type stuff. So, and I think that's going to be the case. This is the fastest growing technology, AI and the agentic AI systems that I've ever seen. So, I don't know where things are going, but I'm excited to be here and involved in them, and it's exciting stuff.
Derek, I mean, I think you're spot on. The evolution and change is happening very rapidly. But
Yeah.
at the end of our session here, I really appreciate you joining us today and your insights, Derek. This is very insightful and very important. I want to also thank the audience for tuning in. There's a lot here to think about, and there's a lot to consider when you're looking at your own solutions. So make sure you do your research and understand. So we do appreciate you being part of the App Dev Angle community. But with that, it wraps up this episode, and we'll be back next Wednesday for another conversation to dive into the tools, trends, and talents shaping the future of application development. Whether you're deploying to the edge, building AI, or modernizing your cloud stack, we've got you covered. Be sure to follow us on social. If you have any thoughts, questions, or you just want to connect, you can always reach me at pauln@siliconangle.com. Until next time, stay curious and stay building.